The check was on the dining table before I even took off my coat. $50 million. My name printed in the upper left corner. The sale of Callaway Systems, the company I had built over 7 years, with 2 partners who betrayed me, 3 funding rounds that nearly destroyed me, and one night I cried in a hotel bathroom in Chicago because I couldn't make payroll the following week. $50 million. And I had torn up the original check, requested another, and placed it in my document folder without even taking a deep breath. My attorney, Dana Voss, said something strange after the papers were signed. Morgan. She closed the dossier slowly, like someone choosing each word with tweezers. Call your adoptive parents tonight. Tell them the sale wasn't approved by the SEC. Tell them you lost everything. I looked at her the way you look at someone who just asked you to walk naked down Fifth Avenue. Dana. I know. You're asking me to lie. I'm asking you to run a test you should have run 10 years ago. She didn't blink. Trust me, just this once. I didn't understand. But I called. And what happened the next day made me realize just how incredibly, dangerously, frighteningly intelligent Dana Voss truly is. My adoptive mother picked up on the second ring. It was almost 11 at night. Morgan. Not a question. A temperature check. I said the words Dana had chosen. The sale stalled in regulatory approval, complications with the board. The lawyers say it could take months, or it might not go through at all. I was being cautious. I was fine. But financially, the next quarter was going to be difficult. 4 seconds of silence. And then my mother said, "Oh, I'm glad you called." Not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "I'm here for you." Not, "How can I help?" "I'm glad you called." Like someone who'd been expecting the call. Like someone who already had the next step written in a notepad beside the phone. She said she wanted to see me on Sunday, that she and my father had something important to discuss, that I shouldn't worry, that they had always taken care of me and would keep taking care of me. I hung up and stared at the ceiling of my apartment for 40 minutes. I'm glad you called. Sunday began at 10 in the morning with the smell of lemon cake. My mother always makes lemon cake when she wants me to lower my guard. And ended at 11:18 with a document folder placed on the living room coffee table. Not a thin folder, a thick one, with tabs, with color-coded dividers. My adoptive father, Robert Hale, set the folder on the table with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the gesture. He's an accountant. Everything he does has a rehearsal. Sit down, Morgan. I was already sitting. We worry about you. My mother, Carol, placed her hand over mine with a warmth that suddenly felt calculated. We always worry. And when you called on Thursday, what is this? I looked at the folder without touching it. It's a proposal. Robert opened the first tab. Letterhead. A name printed at the top. Whitfield Capital Partners. The Whitfields are a family we've known for a long time. The eldest son, Cole, is at a point in his life where he needs a solid partner, intelligent, someone with a background in the technology sector. And you, Dad, you have exactly the profile they're looking for. The silence that followed had texture. It was thick. It filled the room like smoke. I looked at the folder, at the name Whitfield Capital Partners, at the color-coded tabs that someone, my mother, probably, in her round handwriting, had labeled family background, net worth, proposed terms, exit clause, exit clause. There was an exit clause in a document about marriage. When did you do this? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Far too quiet. Morgan, when did you do this? Carol pulled her hand away from mine. The proposal arrived 3 months ago, but we knew you would never consider it while you were in the middle of the sale process. And now that things have changed, 3 months. 3 months ago, I was still in the final negotiation round with Meridian Acquisitions. 3 months ago, I barely slept. 3 months ago, my mother called me every week asking how I was doing, telling me she loved me, telling me she was proud of me. 3 months ago, she already had this folder. I stood up, grabbed my coat, didn't touch the lemon cake. Morgan. Robert's voice had that specific tone he used when he thought I was being impulsive. Sit down. Talk like an adult. I turned at the door. Call me when you're ready to explain why you held on to this for 3 months. He paused. And don't send me lemon cake anymore when you want to manipulate me. It's worked for 20 years. It's done now. I left, closed the door without slamming it, sat in my car for 12 minutes before I could start the engine. Then I took out my phone and sent a message to Dana Voss. You knew. She responded in 40 seconds. I suspected. Now you know too. Tomorrow morning, my office. You'll want to hear what the Whitfield family is proposing before you decide anything. I stared at the message. Before you decide anything. As if there were something to decide. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, Grant Whitfield stood on the 22nd floor of a building on Madison Avenue, facing an acquisition map pinned to a glass wall, when his assistant walked in with a thin dossier and said, "The Callaway report." Grant didn't turn around. He kept looking at the map. He had the posture of someone who never needed to announce he was in charge, because the entire room rearranged itself around him when he walked in. Summarize. Morgan Callaway, 32 years old, founded Callaway Systems at 25, growth of 3,000% over 5 years. Industry reputation, aggressive, ethical, impossible to buy. The assistant paused. The sale to Meridian was finalized last Thursday, $50 million. Grant turned. She signed. Yes, sir. 3 seconds of silence. Grant looked at the dossier his assistant was holding. Not at the photo, at the numbers. Always the numbers first, the photo after. Always. Does Cole know what she's actually worth? Your son believes the sale wasn't approved, that she has no liquidity. Grant's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes, something very small, shifted. Who passed that information to Cole? The Hales, her adoptive parents. Grant took the dossier, opened it to the first page, read for 45 seconds without blinking, closed it, set up a meeting with her attorney. Not with her. He turned back to the map. Not yet. The assistant left. Grant stood alone with the map and the closed dossier in his hand. Impossible to buy. He almost smiled. Almost. At 9 in the morning, Cole Whitfield sent flowers to an address he had obtained from the Hales, Morgan's apartment on the Upper West Side. $300 flowers, handwritten card, the large, generous handwriting that was so distinctly his. Cole was like that, large and generous in everything, including his gestures. The card read, "I heard you're going through a difficult time. You don't have to go through it alone." The delivery man rang the buzzer at 9:11. Morgan opened the door in a robe, hair up, coffee cup in hand, and the expression of someone who hadn't slept. She looked at the flowers, read the card, closed the door. On the other side, the delivery man stood motionless for a moment, bouquet still extended. Then slowly lowered his arms. Up on the 22nd floor of that Madison Avenue building, Grant's phone vibrated with a notification from the security system of the building where he held the apartment, in the name of a holding company. The apartment that Morgan Callaway rented without knowing who the real owner was. He read the notification. Delivery refused. 9:11 a.m. Closed his phone. Impossible to buy. This time he smiled for real. Brief. Only for himself. And then the smile disappeared, because he realized he had smiled, and that was a problem he didn't yet know how to classify. Somewhere between Madison Avenue and the Upper West Side, between a man who built an empire by learning never to be surprised and a woman who built hers by learning never to need anyone, there was a folder with color-coded tabs, a refused bouquet, and a text message from an attorney who knew far more than she said. No one had lost anything yet, but the listener already knew. Someone was about to lose something they didn't even know they had. And when it fell, it was going to hurt in a way that $50 million doesn't fix. Dana's office smelled like cold coffee and precision. Morgan arrived 7 minutes early. She never arrived early. Early was a form of surrender. It said I needed more time to prepare than you did. But she hadn't slept, and sitting in her car in the parking garage felt worse than moving, so she moved. Dana was already at her desk. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the second person in the room. He was standing at the window with his back to the door, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking at the city the way people look at things they already own. Tall, dark hair going silver at the temples in a way that looked less like age and more like a decision. The kind of stillness that isn't relaxed, it's controlled. The kind you build over decades of being the most dangerous person in every room and learning not to advertise it. Morgan stopped in the doorway. Dana stood. "Morgan, thank you for coming." The man at the window turned. His eyes went to her face first. Not her clothes, not her posture, her face. Like he was reading something and wanted to finish the sentence before acknowledging he was reading at all. "Morgan Calloway." Not a greeting. A confirmation. "You have me at a disadvantage," Morgan said. She didn't move from the doorway. "Grant Whitfield." He didn't offer his hand, neither did she. "I believe you've seen my family's name recently." On a folder with color-coded tabs. She finally walked in, chose the chair farthest from his side of the room, closest to Dana. "Your idea or my parents'? The tabs were your mother's." A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "The proposal was mine." Morgan looked at Dana. Dana looked back with the expression of someone who had prepared for this exact reaction and was not going to apologize for it. "You could have called," Morgan said. "I could have." Grant moved from the window to the chair across from her. He sat the way he stood, like the furniture had been designed for him specifically. "I wanted to see how you handled a room you weren't expecting." The silence was immediate and sharp. "And?" Morgan said. "You stopped at the door for 2 seconds. He said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. "You assessed. You chose the chair with the best sight lines. You haven't looked at your phone once." He paused. "You handle it well." "That's not an answer. That's an evaluation." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I evaluate everything before I commit to it." Morgan felt something move in her chest that she immediately decided was irritation. She was good at deciding what things were. "Mr. Whitfield." She opened her hands on the table, a gesture Dana had once told her she used when she was about to dismantle something. "I'm going to save us both 40 minutes. I don't need your family's money. I don't need a strategic alliance disguised as a marriage proposal. And I certainly don't need a husband selected by people who waited 3 months to tell me they'd been negotiating my future over dinner with strangers." Grant didn't blink. "I know you don't need the money." That stopped her. "I know about the Meridian sale," he said. "I know it closed Thursday. I know the exact number." A pause. "Your parents don't." Morgan went very still. "Why?" she said slowly. "Do you know something my own family doesn't?" "Because I do my research before I walk into rooms." He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough. "And because whoever told you to lie to your parents last Thursday was right to do it, I would have done the same." Across the table, Dana Voss said nothing. She had the expression of someone watching a chess match they'd already seen the ending of. Morgan looked at Grant Whitfield for a long moment. At the steadiness of him. At the way he hadn't tried to charm her once. Not a smile, not a softened word, not a single gesture designed to make her comfortable. He was just there. Fully, inconveniently, immovably there. "What do you actually want?" she asked. "A meeting, 1 dinner, you and Cole." He sat back. "No obligations beyond that, no contracts, no tabs." The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. "Color-coded or otherwise? And if I say no, then you say no." He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "But you won't." Morgan looked up at him. That's a bold assumption. It's not an assumption. He held her gaze 1 second longer than necessary. You're already curious. You've been curious since you walked in and found someone in this room who wasn't afraid of you. He paused at the door. 7 o'clock, Friday. Aurelius on 57th. Cole will be there, so will I. He left. The door didn't slam. It closed with a quiet, definitive click that was somehow louder than a slam would have been. Morgan sat completely still for 4 seconds. Then she turned to Dana. You set me up. I prepared you for a conversation you needed to have. That is the same sentence. Dana almost smiled. He's not what you're expecting. He's exactly what I'm expecting. Morgan stood, grabbed her bag. Rich, controlled. Used to getting what he wants by making people feel like wanting it was their idea. And Cole? Morgan paused. Dana said it quietly. Cole called me this morning, before his father did. He wanted to know if you were all right. A beat. He didn't know his father was coming here. He didn't know about any of this meeting. Morgan turned that over. Filed it somewhere she didn't have a label for yet. 7 o'clock Friday. Dana said, You don't have to go. Morgan walked to the door. Stopped with her hand on the frame. The same doorway where she'd assessed the room 40 minutes ago. He noticed the 2 seconds, she said. Not to Dana. Mostly to herself. She left. In the elevator going down, she stared at her own reflection in the metal doors. You've been curious since you walked in and found someone in this room who wasn't afraid of you. She pressed the lobby button harder than she needed to. The worst part, the part she was not going to say out loud to anyone, not even Dana, was that he wasn't wrong. That same afternoon, Cole Whitfield sat across from his father at a corner table in a restaurant they both hated and used only for difficult conversations. I heard you went to her attorney's office, Cole said. I did. Without telling me. Yes. Cole was quiet for a moment. He was 30 years old, with his father's eyes and none of his father's frost. Where Grant was marble, Cole was timber, warm, solid. The kind of man rooms felt easier in. He looked at his father the way people look at weather they've learned to navigate, but never fully trust. Is she what they say she is? Cole asked. Grant picked up his coffee. She's more. Cole nodded slowly. Something moved across his face. Not quite pride, not quite relief. Something that looked like a man deciding to believe in something before he had all the evidence. Did she agree to Friday? Grant looked at his son, at the genuine openness in him, at the way Cole had asked, is she all right before asking, will she come, and how that order said everything about who his son was. She'll come, Grant said. What he didn't say, what he would not say to anyone in that restaurant or any other, was that for the first time in 11 years of arranging things, reading rooms and calculating outcomes before they happened, he had walked out of Dana Voss's office and stood at the elevator and realized he had no idea what Morgan Calloway was going to do next. None. And that he had thought about it the entire walk to his car. Aurelius on 57th was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everyone look like they had something to hide. Morgan arrived at 7 exactly. Not early this time, not late. She wore black, not because she was trying to make a statement, but because black asked nothing of the room, and she needed every available unit of attention for other things. Cole Whitfield was already at the table. He stood when he saw her, not performatively, reflexively, the way men stand when they were raised by someone who made standing non-negotiable. He was taller than she'd expected, broader. He had an honest face, which in her experience was either the best thing a person could have or the most dangerous, depending entirely on whether the honesty was real or rehearsed. Morgan. He extended his hand. His grip was warm, firm, brief. I'm glad you came. Not I'm glad you called. Not her mother's words. Something different in the architecture of the sentence. Relief, not calculation. She sat. He sat. "Your father's not here," she said. "He'll be late." Cole unfolded his napkin. "He's always late to things he arranged himself. I think it's deliberate. Gives him data on how people behave before he enters." Morgan looked at him. Cole caught her expression and almost smiled. "I grew up with him. I've had time to reverse engineer most of it. Does it bother you, knowing how he operates?" Cole considered this with a sincerity that felt almost disarming. "Not anymore. It used to. Now I just factor it in." Morgan picked up the menu without opening it. "He told you about our meeting Wednesday?" "Wednesday night, after the fact." Cole's voice stayed even, but something tightened at the edges. "I want you to know that wasn't my design. I asked about you through the hails because I wanted to know if you were genuinely struggling, not to—" He stopped, started again. "This situation has been handled clumsily by people who thought they were helping. I'm sorry for that." Morgan studied him. The apology had no performance in it. No angle she could find. That was the problem with Cole Whitfield. There was no angle. She was still looking for one when the temperature in the room changed. Grant arrived. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The maitre d' moved differently. The nearby tables shifted almost imperceptibly in their seats. He crossed the room and sat down across from Morgan without removing his jacket, which meant he had somewhere to be after this, or wanted her to believe he did. "You came," he said to her. "You said I would." "I did." He picked up his menu. "I'm rarely wrong about that kind of thing." "What kind of thing?" "Curiosity." He said it without looking up from the menu. "It's the only appetite that doesn't lie." Cole looked between them with the careful stillness of a man recognizing a frequency he wasn't tuned to. The dinner moved. Wine was poured. Pleasantries lasted exactly as long as they needed to. Morgan made sure of that. She asked Cole about his work. He ran the operational side of Whitfield Capital, the part that touched actual companies, actual people, actual consequences. He talked about it the way people talk about things they chose rather than inherited. She found herself listening in the way she only listened when the information mattered. Grant said almost nothing for 40 minutes. He ate. He observed. He refilled her water glass once without being asked, which was either a reflex or a test, and she couldn't determine which. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it out of habit. The name on the screen made her go completely still. Reed Morrison, Meridian Acquisitions. Reed Morrison was the CFO who had signed her sale documents 4 days ago. Reed Morrison had no reason to contact her socially. Reed Morrison calling at 7:40 on a Friday night meant one thing and one thing only. Something had broken. "Excuse me." She stood, stepped away from the table. Cole watched her go. Grant watched the direction she went, and then looked at his son. "She's not what you were told," Grant said quietly. "I know." Cole turned his glass. "She's better." Grant was quiet for a moment. "That makes this more complicated. Or simpler." Cole met his father's gaze. "Depending on what you actually want from it." Grant said nothing, which was itself an answer. In the corridor outside the restaurant, Morgan pressed the phone to her ear. "Reed, talk." Reed Morrison talked. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Morgan stood completely still while the architecture of the last 4 days rearranged itself around her. The Meridian acquisition had a complication, not regulatory, internal. A member of Meridian's board had surfaced a conflict of interest claim against the deal, anonymous filing, but the name attached to the originating law firm, the firm that filed the challenge, was one she recognized, Voss and Partners, Dana's firm, Dana, who had advised the sale, who had told her to lie to her parents, who had set up the meeting with Grant Whitfield 2 days later, whose name was now on the document trying to unravel the transaction that had made Morgan $50 million. "Are you sure?" Morgan said. "The filing is public record as of an hour ago," Reed said. "I'm sorry, Morgan. I thought you should hear it from me." She hung up, stood in the corridor for 7 seconds, then walked back to the table with a face that gave away nothing. which cost her more than it ever had before. Both men looked up when she sat. Cole read her expression and said immediately, "What happened?" Grant read it and said nothing. His eyes moved to her hands, flat on the table, controlled, but the knuckles carrying something she wasn't saying out loud. "The Meridian deal is being challenged," she said. Even, measured. A voice she had spent a decade building. Anonymous filing. Conflict of interest. Cole leaned forward. "Can they block it?" "If the filing has standing, yes." She picked up her wine, put it down without drinking. "They could freeze the funds indefinitely while it's reviewed." "Do you know who filed?" Grant asked. She looked at him. Something in his face shifted, barely, briefly. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Recognition. "You know," she said. Not a question. "I have a guess," he said. "Share it." Grant looked at his son. A look that carried an entire conversation in 1 second. Cole's expression changed, a shadow crossing the openness of his face, something clouding the warmth that had been there all evening. "My father has a competitor," Cole said carefully. "Someone who has been trying to acquire the same technology infrastructure that Callaway Systems represented. Someone who would benefit significantly from that deal falling apart and the asset returning to market." "A name," Morgan said. "Victor Hale," Grant said. The room went quiet. Morgan heard the name land in her chest like something thrown from a height. "Hale." "Robert Hale," she said, "is my adoptive father." "Robert Hale," Grant said, "is Victor Hale's younger brother." The wine glass in Morgan's hand was very still. "Victor Hale has been trying to acquire Callaway Systems for 18 months, Grant continued, his voice even, measured, offering no cushioning because he was not a man who cushioned things. "When the Meridian deal closed, he lost. So he's doing what he does, pulling threads until something unravels." A pause. "Your parents' involvement in this proposal was not entirely innocent, Morgan. I don't believe they understood all of it. But they were used. And so, possibly, were you." Cole was watching her with an expression she didn't have architecture for yet, something between fury on her behalf and helplessness at the edges of it. Morgan set down her glass. "The calculation was instantaneous. Dana's firm on the filing, Victor Hale behind it, her parents holding that folder for 3 months, Grant Whitfield knowing about the Meridian sale before anyone told him. Everyone in this story had been playing a longer game than she knew. Everyone except Cole. She looked at Cole Whitfield, at the anger in him that was completely on her behalf, at the fact that he'd been kept in the dark too, that his father had brought him to this dinner knowing what might surface, and hadn't warned him either. She looked at Grant. "You knew this was coming," she said. "Before tonight. I suspected it was a possibility. And you brought me here anyway." "I brought you here," Grant said, "because you needed to be in the room when it happened. Not alone in your apartment reading a press release at midnight." His eyes didn't move from hers. "You needed people who had resources when the filing went public. Whether you like the reason you're here or not, you're better off here than anywhere else tonight." Morgan held his gaze for a long moment. The worst part, again, the part she would not say out loud, was that he was right. She hated that most of all. The call came at 11:42 Friday night. Morgan was still in the car. Not driving. Parked outside her building, engine off, watching the doorman through the glass lobby doors pretend not to notice she'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. She had the Meridian filing open on her phone, reading the same paragraph for the 4th time without absorbing a single word. Her phone lit up. Unknown number. She answered because at this point, the night had already broken every boundary she'd set for it. "Ms. Callaway." A voice she didn't recognize. Male. Efficient. "My name is Patrick Rue. I'm senior counsel at Whitfield Capital. Mr. Whitfield asked me to reach you tonight with some information regarding the Meridian filing." She sat up. "At midnight. He said you'd still be awake." She hated that Grant Whitfield was right about her sleep schedule. She hated it specifically and with texture. "Talk," she said. Patrick Rue talked for 6 minutes. By the end of those 6 minutes, Morgan had 3 things she hadn't had before: the name of the attorney who filed the challenge, a copy of Victor Hale's acquisition history showing a pattern of identical interference tactics used against 4 other deals over 8 years, and a direct line to a litigation team that could have a counterfiling ready before Monday morning. "Mr. Whitfield is offering the resources of Whitfield Capital's legal department at no cost," Patrick said. "No strings. No conditions attached to the offer." Morgan was quiet. "Ms. Calloway." "Tell him I'll call him in the morning," she said. She hung up, looked at the lobby doors, looked at her phone. No strings, no conditions. She had been in business long enough to know that sentence was either the most honest thing a person could say or the most sophisticated lie. The distance between the two was exactly the problem. She got out of the car and went upstairs. She did not sleep. Saturday morning arrived gray and specific, the kind of New York morning that feels like the city is running diagnostics. Morgan showed up at Whitfield Capital's Midtown offices at 8:15 with 2 coffees and the Meridian filing annotated in red ink across 11 pages. The building's weekend security called upstairs. She waited in the marble lobby with the posture of someone who had decided to be here and was not going to perform uncertainty about that decision. Grant was on the 41st floor. He was on the phone when she walked in. He held up one finger, not dismissively, the way people do when they want to assert priority, but practically, the way people do when they're actually finishing a sentence. He finished it, hung up, looked at her hands. She set one of the coffees on his desk. He looked at it, then at her. "You annotated the filing," he said. 11 pages. "The conflict of interest claim has 3 structural weaknesses." She sat across from him, without being invited to, which she suspected he noted and did not mind. "The third one is the most useful because it implicates the filing attorney directly. If your team leads with that, the challenge loses standing before it reaches a panel." Grant picked up the annotated document, read for 90 seconds without touching the coffee. Then he said, "Page 7, the jurisdictional argument, is the strongest long-term but the slowest to execute. I'd run it parallel, not lead with it." Grant looked up from the page. It was a brief look, unguarded in a way his looks almost never were. Less than a second, but she caught it. And what was in it wasn't calculation or assessment or the careful management of information. It was simpler than that. It was the specific expression of someone encountering a mind that operates at the same altitude as their own, and being, for one undefended moment, genuinely surprised by the relief of it. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled surface she'd come to recognize as his default. "I'll have Patrick incorporate this into the counterfiling," he said. "I want to be in the room when your team reviews it. That's not standard procedure. It's my company and my $50 million. She met his gaze. "I don't do standard procedure when the stakes are personal." A pause. Grant set the document down, picked up the coffee she'd brought finally, and drank without ceremony. 10 o'clock, he said. "Conference room B." The next 4 hours were the strangest Morgan had spent in a professional setting, which was a category that included a board meeting where 2 grown men had thrown binders at each other, and a due diligence call conducted entirely while she had food poisoning in a Denver hotel room. Grant's legal team was excellent. She acknowledged this privately, without pleasure, because acknowledging it required acknowledging that he'd built something genuinely good, and that complicated the clean lines she was trying to maintain around who he was. He sat at the head of the table. She sat 3 chairs down, not across from him, which would have been oppositional, not beside him, which would have been something else entirely. 3 chairs was the distance of professional alignment without personal declaration. For the first 2 hours she contributed when her specific knowledge of Calloway systems was relevant. For the 3rd hour, she stopped filtering and just worked, because the problem was interesting and she was constitutionally incapable of being in the room with an interesting problem and not fully engaging with it. Grant noticed the shift. She knew because he stopped managing her contributions around the team and started building on them directly, the way people do when they've stopped performing collaboration and started actually collaborating. At one point he said, "The representation clause on page 4, before she could say it. She looked at him. "I read fast," he said. "So do I." "I know." He turned to Patrick. "Run the representation clause parallel to the jurisdictional argument. Morgan's right about the sequencing." Morgan's right. Said to a room of 8 attorneys at a conference table on a Saturday morning about a filing strategy in a completely neutral tone. No emphasis, no performance of acknowledgement. Just the functional transfer of information, the way you cite a correct source. It was the most professionally respectful thing anyone had said to her in 6 months. She did not react. But it settled somewhere in her chest with a weight that was entirely inconvenient. They broke at 2 in the afternoon. The team filed out. Morgan stayed to gather her annotated pages. Grant stayed because he was the kind of man who was always the last one in his own room. The silence between them was different from the restaurant, less armed. "Your parents didn't know the full picture," Grant said. He was looking out the window, his default position, she was realizing, when he was about to say something he'd chosen carefully. Victor Hale told Robert and Carol that the Whitfield proposal was a social connection. A good match. He used them, Morgan. They were a mechanism, not a partner. Morgan folded her papers. "That doesn't entirely excuse 3 months of silence." "No," he turned. "It doesn't. But it changes what it means." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to have to decide what to do about your family." A pause. "And that decision is harder if you're carrying more anger than the situation actually earned." The precision of it landed like something surgical. She had spent 36 hours building a clean architecture of betrayal, parents who conspired, a family who sold her future for a social alliance. It was neat. It was manageable. It held. And Grant Whitfield had just quietly removed 2 of its load-bearing walls. "You do that deliberately," she said. "Take things apart before someone can use them as armor. Sometimes," he held her gaze, "when the armor is going to cost the person more than whatever it's protecting them from." Morgan was quiet for a long moment. "Cole called me this morning," she said. Something moved in Grant's expression. Controlled. Immediate. "He wants to take me to that filing hearing," she said. "Says he wants to be visible. Put Whitfield Capital's public support on record so Victor Hale can't spin the narrative. That's a sound strategy. It's also a genuinely kind instinct." She watched his face. "You know he didn't do this for strategy." Grant said nothing, which was, she'd learned in 48 hours, how he confirmed things he wouldn't say out loud. "He's a good man," Morgan said. "He is." Grant's voice was even, careful. "The best thing I built." The sentence sat between them with a weight neither of them touched. Morgan picked up her papers and her bag, walked to the door. Stopped at the threshold. She kept stopping at his threshold, she noticed, and she did not examine why. "The coffee was terrible, by the way," Grant said behind her. She turned. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing it did, the almost smile that lasted less than a second and cost him something every time. "I know," she said. "I got it from the cart on 54th. The one near your building." A pause. "You knew where my building was," he said. "I do my research before I walk into rooms." She held his gaze for exactly 1 beat longer than necessary. Then she left. In the elevator going down, she pressed the lobby button and stared at her own reflection and thought about Cole Whitfield, who was warm and honest and genuinely good. And she thought about his father, who had just spent 4 hours building her a defense he had no obligation to build, who had dismantled her anger with 3 sentences because he thought it was costing her too much, who bought bad coffee from a cart she'd just proven she'd researched. The best thing I built. The elevator opened. She walked out and did not look back up at the 41st floor. She was very careful not to look back. The counter filing landed Monday morning like a precise, quiet detonation. By noon, Victor Hale's legal team had requested a continuance. By 2 o'clock, the continuance was denied. By 4, Reed Morrison called Morgan to tell her the Meridian board had reviewed the situation, reaffirmed the acquisition, and that her $50 million was no longer in question. She thanked him, hung up, sat at her kitchen counter and felt nothing for about 30 seconds. Then she felt everything at once, which was worse. She called Cole. He picked up on the first ring. She could hear the relief in his voice before he said a word, the specific exhale of someone who had been carrying tension on behalf of another person and was only now setting it down. "It's done," she said. "I know." Patrick called. A pause. "How are you?" The question was so simple and so direct that it caught her somewhere unguarded. She had spent 72 hours being competent in rooms full of people who needed her to be competent. And Cole Whitfield's first question was not about the filing or the funds or the strategy. It was 2 words pointed entirely at her. "I'm fine," she said. Then, because he'd earned more than the reflex, "I will be." "That's honest." She could hear him smile. "Dinner tonight. Just us. Nothing formal. I know a place on the west side that doesn't take reservations, and the lighting is terrible, and the food is the best thing you've ever eaten." She said yes. She meant it. The restaurant was everything Cole promised, cramped, loud, lit by what appeared to be 2 candles, and optimism. They sat at a corner table with their knees almost touching and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with filings, or families, or $50 million. He told her about the first company he'd tried to save at Whitfield Capital, a manufacturing plant in Ohio, 200 jobs, a balance sheet that didn't lie but didn't tell the whole truth either. He'd fought his father on the terms of the rescue package for 6 weeks. Lost. The plant closed anyway. He still thought about it. She told him about the night in Chicago, the hotel bathroom, the payroll she couldn't make. He listened the way people listen when they're not preparing their response, fully, without agenda. "You never told that story publicly," he said. "Vulnerability reads as weakness in my industry. Or it reads as the reason the people who worked for you stayed," he said quietly, "because they knew you understood what it cost." Morgan looked at him across the candlelight. This was the problem with Cole Whitfield. He had the precise quality of making you feel accurately seen. Not flattered, not managed, not handled. Seen. And she hadn't realized until this moment, in this badly lit restaurant, how long it had been since someone had offered her that without wanting something in return. She drove home alone with the windows down, and the city moving past her and something warm and complicated sitting in her chest. She was almost at her building when her phone rang. Grant. She stared at his name for 2 full rings, answered. "The Hale filing has a secondary component," he said. No greeting, no preamble. His voice was controlled in a way that told her the control was intentional. Victor Hale's attorney submitted a supplemental claim this evening. It was time-stamped 4 hours ago. After the primary challenge failed, Morgan pulled over. "What kind of supplemental claim?" "A conflict of interest allegation." A pause that carried weight. "Against Dana Voss." Specifically, her prior relationship with Whitfield Capital. 2 years ago, Dana consulted for one of our portfolio companies for 8 months. Victor's attorney is arguing that her counsel on the Callaway sale was compromised by that existing relationship, that she steered you toward the Whitfield proposal as a condition of continued referral business. The city noise outside her car window continued indifferently. "Is it true?" Morgan said. Her voice was completely flat. The voice she used when she was past emotion and into calculation. "Did Dana consult for Whitfield Capital?" A pause. "Yes," Grant said. One word, undecorated, the only kind of answer he was capable of. "Did you know who Dana was before Wednesday's meeting?" Another pause, shorter. But she heard it. "Yes." Morgan closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "Did you arrange for her to be my attorney?" "No." Immediate. Certain. Dana Voss's reputation speaks for itself. The fact that she had worked with one of our portfolio companies 2 years ago was a coincidence I became aware of after she requested the meeting. But you didn't tell me. Silence. Grant. His name in her mouth had a different weight now. Not the careful neutrality of professional address, something tighter. You sat in that office on Wednesday. You sat at dinner on Friday. You sat in that conference room for 4 hours on Saturday. At any point, you could have told me that my own attorney had a prior connection to your family. At any point. The connection was historical and clean, he said. The supplemental claim is a distortion of something that carried no actual conflict. That is not the point. Her voice stayed flat, controlled, which meant it was the most dangerous it had been all week. The point is that I have spent 4 days making decisions about the filing, about your legal team, about your family, about... She stopped, restarted. I made those decisions believing I had complete information. I didn't, and you knew I didn't. The silence on the line was different from his other silences. Not calculated, not managed. Something in it was exposed. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. The immediacy of it, the absence of qualification. I made a judgment call, he continued. I assessed that the information was not material to the filing strategy, and that surfacing it would create a distraction at the worst possible time. I was managing the outcome instead of respecting your right to the complete picture. A pause. That was wrong. I know it was wrong. Morgan sat in her parked car and looked at the streetlight through the windshield and felt the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been 3 steps behind the truth all week. How do I know, she said slowly, that this is the last thing you didn't tell me? The question sat on the line between them like something neither of them could move. You don't, Grant said. Not tonight. Tonight you have every reason not to trust my judgment about what you need to know. Another pause. Longer, heavier. But I need to tell you something now. Before tomorrow, before the supplemental filing becomes public, before you hear it from anyone else. Say it. Victor Hale's secondary strategy isn't just the Dana claim, Grant said. He's planning to leak the original Whitfield proposal to the press. The framing will be that the Callaway acquisition was manufactured, that Meridian was a Whitfield-adjacent buyer, that the entire sale was orchestrated to deliver your company's technology to our portfolio at below-market terms. A pause. It isn't true. The Meridian acquisition is completely independent, but the narrative will damage your reputation in the market before it can be disproven, and he knows that. Morgan understood immediately, not the legal mechanics, the human architecture. Victor Hale didn't need to win in court. He needed 48 hours of bad press and a technology sector that ran on perception and moved fast on rumor. He's going to make it look like I was played, she said. Yes. By you. Yes. The word arrived like a door closing. And if I'm publicly associated with Whitfield Capital right now, she said, working through it in real time, even in the context of defending against the filing, that association validates the narrative before we can counter it. Yes. Which means the strongest move I have. She stopped. Is distance, Grant said. Public, visible distance from this family, from Cole, from me. The streetlight outside her window blurred slightly. She blinked it clear. Cole doesn't know, she said. No. You're telling me before you tell him. A pause that told her everything. You needed to know first, Grant said, because the decision about what happens next belongs to you, not to me, not to Cole. His voice carried something she hadn't heard in it before. Not softness exactly, but the specific weight of a man who understood the cost of what he was asking. I can protect the filing. I can protect the funds. I cannot protect your name in the market without making it worse. That part is yours to navigate. Morgan was quiet for a long moment. Outside her car, New York continued its indifferent machinery. Cabs, voices. Someone's music bleeding through a closed window 3 floors up. Cole is going to feel like a liability, she said. It wasn't a question. He's going to feel like one, Grant said. He isn't. But perception is what Hale is selling. You built him, Morgan said quietly. You said so yourself. And now you're telling me to walk away from him publicly to protect my company. The silence that followed was the longest Grant Whitfield had allowed since she'd met him. I'm telling you what the situation requires, he said finally. What you do with that is yours. It wasn't an answer. It was also the most honest thing he'd said in 5 days. I'll call you in the morning, she said. She hung up. She sat in the car for a very long time. She thought about Cole's voice on the phone that afternoon. How are you? The badly lit restaurant, the Ohio plant he still thought about, the way he listened. She thought about Grant in a conference room on a Saturday, building her defense with no obligation to build it, dismantling her anger because he thought it was costing her too much. The almost smile that lasted less than a second and cost him something every time. She thought about what it meant that he had called her first. She thought about the look on his face when she'd said Cole is a good man. She thought about the way he'd said yes. And she thought about the fact that somewhere between the filing and the coffee and the conference room, she had stopped looking for Cole Whitfield's angle and started looking for his father's. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel for exactly 4 seconds. Then she sat up, started the engine, and drove. She called Cole at 7 in the morning. Not Grant, not Donna. Cole first. Because he deserved to hear it from her before he heard it from anyone else. And because whatever she had to say next, she was not going to become someone who managed people instead of talking to them. He picked up on the second ring. I know, he said. She stopped. Your father called you. Last night, after you hung up. A pause that carried no anger, just the specific quiet of someone who had already done the hard work of processing something while the city slept. He told me everything. The Dana connection, Hale's leak strategy, what it means for your name in the market if we stay visible together right now. Morgan sat at her kitchen counter with both hands around a coffee she hadn't touched. Cole, can I say something first? His voice was steady, the steadiness of timber, not marble, warm but load-bearing. I've been thinking about this since 2 in the morning, and I need to say it before you say whatever you've prepared to say. Okay. I like you, Morgan. Genuinely. Not as a profile in a folder, not as a strategic alliance, not as my father's arrangement. A breath. These 4 days, the dinner, last night, that was real. I want you to know that before anything else. The honesty of it landed without cushioning. I know, she said, and she did. But I've also spent 30 years watching my father read situations with a precision I've never been able to replicate. And when he called me last night, Cole paused. He wasn't strategic about it. He wasn't managing the outcome. He was asking me if I was all right. Another pause. My father has not asked me if I was all right since my mother left when I was 14, in 16 years. Morgan was very still. He called you first, Cole said. He told me he called you first. And the reason he gave me... His voice shifted. Careful now, deliberate. He said she needs to be the one who decides, not the situation, not the market, not Hale's timeline, her. A beat of silence. My father has never, in my entire life, handed a decision to someone else and called it theirs, not once. The kitchen was completely quiet. I'm not stepping back because of the filing, Cole said. I'm stepping back because I think you already know what you're choosing, and I think you've known since Saturday morning. His voice held no bitterness, only the particular dignity of a man who was genuinely good and knew the difference between losing and being honest. I just needed you to hear that I see it too, so you don't have to carry the weight of telling me. Morgan closed her eyes. You deserved better than this situation, she said. I got 4 days with someone remarkable, Cole said. That's not nothing. A pause. Call him, Morgan. He hung up. She sat at the counter for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. Grant answered before the first ring finished. Where are you? She said. Office. On a Sunday. I was waiting, he said, and offered nothing else around it. She grabbed her coat. The 41st floor was empty on Sunday morning except for Grant at his desk, jacket on for once, looking at nothing in particular when she walked in. He stood when she entered, which she noted because in every previous encounter, the furniture had rearranged itself around him. This time he rearranged himself around her arrival. The distinction was small and enormous. She stopped in the middle of the room, not at the doorway this time. "You called me first," she said. "Yes. You told Cole before the filing went public, before your reputation needed managing, before there was any strategic reason to be transparent." She watched his face. "You did it because I deserved to know." "Yes. That's not how you operate." "No," he said, "it isn't." The admission sat between them without apology. "You have been 3 steps ahead of every situation this week," she said. "Every room, every filing, every conversation. You read outcomes before they happen, and you position accordingly." She took 1 step closer. "But you called me last night and handed me the decision and told me it was mine. Why?" Grant was quiet for a moment. The controlled surface of him was entirely present, but underneath it, visible in the way a current is visible through clear water, was something that had no strategy in it at all. "Because I've spent 11 years building outcomes," he said, "arranging pieces, reading rooms, knowing what people will do before they do it." A pause. "And then you walked into Dana's office on Wednesday and stopped at the door for 2 seconds and chose the chair with the best sight lines and looked at me like I was a problem you were going to solve on your own timeline." Something shifted in his eyes, and I realized I had no idea what you were going to do next. None. For the first time in longer than I can accurately remember. Morgan held his gaze. "That frightened you," she said. "It interested me. A beat. Which for me is more frightening. 1 more step." "I'm not a portfolio company," she said. "I know. I'm not an arrangement or a proposal or a strategic alliance. I'm not something you build or acquire or position." Her voice was even. Certain. The voice she used when she was stating terms. "If this is something, whatever this is, it operates on complete information. Both directions. Non-negotiable." "Agreed," he said. "Immediate. No calculation." "And Cole? Cole is my son, and he is not a casualty of this," Grant said, with a firmness that told her this was the line he'd drawn for himself before she arrived. "I will not damage what I have with him. If you and I are, whatever this is, he is part of the picture, not a complication. Part of it. I spoke to him this morning." Grant's expression shifted. "I know. He told me to call you." Something crossed Grant Whitfield's face that she had not seen before, and suspected very few people had ever seen at all. Unguarded, unmanaged, the specific expression of a man surprised by his own son's generosity, and moved by it in a way he didn't entirely know how to contain. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled surface. But she had seen it. And they both knew she'd seen it. "Victor Hale's leak goes to press tomorrow morning," Grant said. Returning to solid ground she recognized, because solid ground was how he stabilized himself. "The counter-narrative needs to be positioned tonight. I have 2 financial journalists who will run the accurate version of the Meridian acquisition if we give them access before the leak hits. I want to read everything before it goes out," she said, "obviously. And I'm talking to Dana today. Whatever the filing claims, she's my attorney, and she gets to respond directly before this becomes a press narrative." "Agreed." "And Grant." She waited until he met her eyes. "Next time you make a judgment call about what I need to know, ask me first." The almost smile appeared. Lasted longer than usual. A full second, maybe 2. "That's going to require significant adjustment," he said. "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm told I'm impossible to buy. I'm also told I handle rooms well." A beat. "I can handle this." He looked at her for a long moment, the way he'd looked at her numbers first in Dana's office. with full attention, nothing withheld, reading to the end of the sentence before acknowledging he was reading. "Yes," he said. "You can." He moved to his desk and picked up his phone. She moved to the chair across from him, not 3 chairs down, across. The distance of direct engagement, full visibility, nothing managed. She opened her laptop. He dialed his first contact. Outside the 41st floor windows, New York was indifferently, relentlessly itself, loud and grey and entirely uninterested in the specific moment of 2 people sitting across from each other and choosing, with full information and clear eyes, to be in the same room. No destiny, no accident, no arrangement made by other people's hands. Just a decision, made at the cost of everything it required. And both of them, for the first time all week, exactly where they'd chosen to be. 3 weeks later, Cole Whitfield was the best man at a charity gala where Morgan Calloway sat at the head table and delivered a speech about building companies from nothing that made 2 venture capitalists cry and 1 board chairman immediately request a meeting. Cole watched from across the room with a glass of water and the expression of someone who had lost something and found, in its place, something he hadn't known to want. The uncomplicated pride of seeing someone he genuinely liked exactly where she belonged. His father stood at the back of the room. He wasn't watching the speech. He was watching Cole. And when Cole caught his eye across the room and raised his glass, a small gesture, private, the language of 2 people who had navigated something difficult and come out the other side intact, Grant Whitfield raised his back. Morgan, at the podium, didn't see the exchange, but she would hear about it later that night. Grant would tell her, because they had agreed on complete information, and he was, with considerable effort and surprising consistency, honoring that agreement. And when he told her, she would be quiet for a moment, and then she would say, "That's the best thing you've built," and he would not correct her.